So my name is Adnan Hendricks, if you haven't heard of me. The reason why I leave this slide is so that you guys have my Twitter and my email. So anytime after the session, you guys can just shoot me a message if any of this is not really clear. So I'm a South African citizen living in the Netherlands, but I basically work everywhere. And generally I'm up in the cloud, so to speak. And the nice thing about E2E is that you end up in nice places like Greece and also my hometown, Cape Town, South Africa. So we had a wonderful time with the E2E version of in South Africa or Cape Town. Spent some nice moments with a couple of people up on my mountain, Table Mountain, and it was really a kind of like a special moment for me to have everybody there. I mean, Sasha found out he was quite good at boat modeling, and we even celebrated Gunnar's birthday at a traditional braai held by Remco, who's currently speaking in the back. So, as you can see, a lot of nice places visited. A lot of those chaps are in this room right now, so you guys can speak to them. And we did some important stuff, you know, like work and wine tasting and the local crafts market, you know, all the important stuff. But we really had a great time there. And you know, we met a lot of guys in Cape Town, businesses that came to talk about how they do things there. And that's also one of the great things, you know, when you do an E2E, you end up in a country, somebody's never gone to a conference, and you find out how challenging it can be for them to do their thing. You know, we are lucky here in Europe. We have good internet, you know, fiber at home, a lot better than some companies elsewhere in the world. So, okay, we also did some real work stuff. So just to prove it, I put that up there. But we're all moving to digital transformation. I mean, most of you guys know by now, there's been a major push the past couple of years. I mean, even Microsoft's Azure Cloud has been in existence for 10 years now. Some other cloud providers even more so. And the cloud is growing and growing and growing, but I find a lot of people are still struggling with traditional methods, or letting go of traditional methods to move to the cloud and do their new infrastructure in a cloudy way. So like the cloud or Azure can basically host infrastructure workloads for just about any scale or business for that matter. And because we still have a lot of infrastructure and some companies have value towards being on premises, you know, the cloud is hybrid by design. And during our struggle to transform our existing infrastructure or data centers, moving from that whole on-premises environment, you know, we have the options of hybrid clouds and private clouds and public clouds. We still have those challenges. And most of the challenges I feel, and you guys I'm sure will agree with me, is that we're still sitting with those applications. Which is why I'm also quite favorable on the other session happening right now. Is because a lot of my clients, they have a problem with the application, and most of the time, now I know you can go and lift and shift to the cloud, but then you're still doing things the way you used to do things, with infrastructure as a service. So if you're going to be porting your virtual machines, whether you're using ASR or manually or whatever method, to your cloud provider like AWS or Azure, you're not really doing it in a cloudy way. So quite often, you know, we're all struggling with what are we going to do? How are we going to move there? Which services do we need? So how do you choose an appropriate compute stack? For example, I already mentioned it, if moving your existing infrastructure, without refactoring or changing anything, just shifting and lifting, you're still basically doing the same thing. I've added links in some of my presentation slides so you guys can go into more detail on the documents and architecture and guidance. But if you really want to move towards a true cloud platform or cloud way, you really have to move towards PAAS services, this platform as a service services. And luckily on Azure, you can go and build those kind of services or use those kind of services and build an infrastructure based on PAAS instead of traditional IaaS. In fact, we've moved from physical service to virtualization to containers and PAAS. In fact, we've moved beyond that using serverless. And the difference between PAAS and serverless is that PAAS is still reliant off an underlying infrastructure. The nice thing is you don't have to worry about it. So the vendor takes care of the infrastructure as a service layer, and all you need to do is develop your application, if you're using app services for example, or just focus on your database. So no worrying about installing SQL Server on a specific a virtual machine or operating system. You get SQL on Linux and app services on Linux as well. Oops. So you can focus on the little bit that you need to do, but how do you get there? And that's hopefully how I'm going to help you guys out. The nice thing is, once you modernize your application, so there's less of you to worry about, there's also less to pay. So the more you move towards PAAS services, you're going to save a lot. Because you save a lot of work that you don't need to do, and with that the costs are also low. So some of the advantages of moving to a PAAS services, once you forgo the infrastructure layer, it is, yeah, a question.
Let's go back slide. Can you send me that, because I'm presenting on platform as a service in the next session.
Sure.
It'd be a great slide to have.
Sure, will do. So what are the advantages? You get more automation. It's easier to develop. It's easier to deploy. It's simple in management and monitoring, because most of those things are provided inherently by the provider that you're building on. So Azure makes insights available. All you really have to do is select it or put it on. A lot of things, obviously the more luxurious you want your infrastructure to be monitored or to be managed, depends on the cost. So I'm not saying everything is free or that everything is cheaper, but within PAAS, depending on the service that you're taking, you're going to be dealing with different kinds of costs available. And I'll show you guys in some of the services how those costs are managed. So you'll get things like basic, where you get certain things for free. And on Azure, you have a lot of free services. So even with a normal Azure subscription account, you could run basic services free that are always free. And if you took out a trial, a 12-month trial in Azure, you have certain services that would be free for the 12 months. So they're really, making it easy for people to just get in and try some stuff. And if you have enterprise agreements, you probably have Azure credits anyway. So speak to your licensing manager or somebody that deals with that contract to find out how you guys can utilize that, because you're probably sitting with thousands of Azure credits per month that you could just use to test stuff that you're going to do anyway. So rather getting early, getting the testing done. So a lot of features, more automation I mentioned, easy migration and scaling and making it highly available. It's all built in because that's what they cater for. I mean, if you were to make a SQL Server highly available within your organization, you'd have to have a multiple instances of SQL Server running, so that you set up pretty much a cluster, so that if one of your hosts or servers go down, your database will still be up and running. And I'll think of all the costs and the management and the infrastructure and work hours that goes into doing that, just to make highly available. In PAAS, you just have to select that option. Obviously, you pay a bit more depending on the options that you choose. Now, to just have a quick view, because some people think that, what's the difference between PAAS and serverless? Now, they're pretty much similar. Only difference is, in serverless, you have less control over your deployment environment. Serverless is basically, you have an area. I don't like using the term container. Some people say it's a container. It's really just a location where your code or programming runs in, and you don't have that much choice. You pretty much only have the choice of the options that the vendor supports. With PAAS, you have a bit more control. So with Azure, you have PAAS services like App Service, so you can create websites, and you have a say in whether the underlying infrastructure needs to be Windows or Linux or even a container for that matter. So depending on the differences, you have more flexibility when it comes to PAAS. So certain things like application scale, and in a way, by determining in some part the underlying infrastructure during the cost of a PAAS service, you can maybe make it cheaper sometimes. With serverless, quite often your programming gets billed per second, per minute, for as long as the program runs, or the application runs in a serverless environment. And that's one of the reasons why they've also made it possible nowadays to be able to have some sort of selection in if your programming is going to be running continuously or almost continuously, they have another payment option. Okay. So now you've worked out the strategy, the buzzwords, the lingo through Chris's help. How do you plan? What are you going to do? So the best advice or options that you have is either to rehost, refactor, or re-architect. So refactor and re-architect in terms of using maybe CloudHouse, or speaking to your development team within your internal organization, or developers that are external to look at your applications. And that's really why, I'm traditionally a Windows guy, but I'm one of the IT guys who says, well, it doesn't matter what the operating system is. I actually want us to move towards a more flexible operating system, where we don't have to worry about things like partitions, disks, formatting the drive in a certain way, having that C drive and other drive letters. I'd love a world where the application just runs. So there are ways in which you could refactor or rewrite your application towards a more PAAS application. So looking at things like the Azure App Service, to quickly build, deploy and scale your applications, or create websites that can be managed using cloud management tools. You can develop in a number of different languages and have enterprise-grade integration, security and support. So there's quite a lot of flexibility if you were to move web applications towards an app service in Azure. In fact, it takes about 5 minutes to create one of these things. And then probably, depending on the difficulty of your web application, there is a nice easy migrate tool, an assessment tool that you can use to assess if it can be migrated directly. Or with minimal changes to it. Your developers could just upload either through FTP or through a publishing profile to a specific deployment slot. And with the ability to have multiple deployment slots, you know, in the traditional method, in IIS especially, it used to be a bit of a pain to set up an IIS server or web server for a client, so they can just have a server to publish their website on. So under the app services umbrella, you have web apps falling under PAAS. You also have the web app for containers and an app service environment. The app service environment is an option where you could connect it to any lift and shift infrastructure that you've moved or created within Azure. So utilizing VNet access. So where you connect an app service to infrastructure as a service within your cloud subscription. And then using serverless as well for event-driven or code-based things. So app service is one of them. Then you also have the Azure Sequel, so SQL Server. And depending on the complexity of your SQL Server or databases, you can either move it to a single database model or Azure Sequel. And once again, depending on your pricing strategy and investment strategy in building your infrastructure, there's different payment options. Or if it's a very complex SQL Server, the SQL Server managed instance service is a more one-on-one capability and compatibility with traditional SQL Server. And that's the Azure Sequel database instance. So it allows for security isolation, apps can be moved, SQL agent, SQL profiler, because a lot of people in the beginning, they kind of had an issue with Azure SQL. They had agents, they had a lot of complex connectivity and reasons for not being able to use them. So I just want to go into a demo environment. How am I doing for time? And go to my Azure subscription, which is here. Let me just use this. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. So under all services or in Azure, you can see there's quite a lot of things that you can do. Now one of the options under web is the app services, as you can see. So app services, but I just want to show you guys the free stuff. So under all services, you can type it free and you can just go to free services. You can, so you guys can get an idea of what's free with a trial account. So these items up to the limits that are shown are free for 12 months with a trial account. So you could run a Linux virtual machine for 750 hours or a Windows virtual machine for 750 hours. A SQL databases for 250 gigs, 5 gigs of Azure storage as Azure Cosmos DB, and some of the always free services. So there's a lot of websites that are always free, but it's pretty basic. So maybe you just want to try and test something to see if the components can connect to one another or is functional. And in that way, it will incur minimal costs. So you guys can have a look at some of these things that are listed here. That's always free. So under my app services, like if we want to develop a website, I just have to add one. So I could either just add an app service or web app, or choose something from the marketplace, something complicated, maybe one of the options that you already use. There's thousands of these options within the marketplace, and some of these can either also be a SaaS application. For example, WordPress. I know some of you guys maybe already blog on a WordPress site. You could either use WordPress as SaaS, or you could deploy it as an app, a web app, as a PAAS offering. Okay, so that's one of the options.
Did the performance of WordPress in Azure improve? I did it like 1 year ago, and it was very bad performance.
Bad.
WordPress on App Service.
Which app service type did you select?
It makes no sense. I changed it to a bigger.
Better.
Yeah. So
Right.
it was like a coding issue, and this is probably already solved.
I think it's probably fixed already,
Yeah.
you know. So in the beginning, because a lot of people ask me like, what's the performance impact? And quite often you actually have to be scaled to almost exactly the same that they're using to kind of have a good match. But I'd use Control Up for that. I just want to give it a name. Select my subscription. Thank you to Microsoft, I still have 3. Specify my resource group. And the nice thing is I can specify my operating system and publish code. But I want to head straight into app service plan. So I'm going to create a separate app service plan for this web app. I'm just going to call it REST EU1 and specify I want it in Amsterdam, which is West Europe. So it should be my close one. And looking at your pricing structure, the different pricing tiers. So this is where I can kind of cap on the performance that I expect and the storage that I require. I can go and select whether, if I'm testing, I can use dev test, and then the underlying hardware infrastructure is pretty basic. But for production, I'd want at least a minimal of S1, and I can increase, always scale out, or scale up. We'll select the isolated option and have the ability to connect it to my infrastructure as a service. So you can always scale up or scale out at any point in time. But I'm just going to click on OK and save it. And you can see that the DNS name for a web app is azurewebsites.net. And I just called bind test app E2E. Once it's created, I forgot to put on insights, but application insights, all I have to do is just switch it on, really. And then it will go and create that website for me. Now I've already deployed a different application that's made up of a number of different services within Azure. So I've set up, I'll just quickly use the IoT solution to deploy an application so that you guys can see a more realistic application and the underlying Azure infrastructure and how it's using things like storage, where the programmatic lies. So this is basically a IoT solution that I've deployed from the Azure IoT suites, because the other application that I had kind of bombed out on me, so this went pretty quickly. So it's deployed a number of different web apps with attached to a specific service plans, utilizing storage accounts. Instead of a database, it's just saving data to storage. So this is a maintenance application, because we fly a lot. So we like companies that look after their engines on their planes and the maintenance on their airplanes. So this program monitors the virtual devices that's utilized within this application on this airplane. So there's a number of sensors that's measuring sensor input data, and it's looking at the different life cycles, telling them when they need to do maintenance. So I'm just going to stop the simulation for a bit and show you guys in Azure. Okay, this web app has deployed as well. I'm just going to go there. I'm just going to go to my So with 2 clicks, I've got a worldwide available app service. Now all I have to do is just upload my website to that location, and I can do it through FTP, and Azure gives the FTP information in my Essentials pane, and I could download a publishing profile and upload it to that. But I just want to take you guys straight to my application on my IoT solution, because I want to show you guys all the different services that's being utilized in that website with the program and what's. So the basic idea is there's virtual devices that's connected via an IoT hub and an event hub, and it's storing information in a storage account. So there should be 2 storage accounts over here. So it's got 2 app services. It's running 2 app service plans for my different 2 websites. It has a event hub namespace, so the connection for my data to travel through, an IoT hub, that's the connection to my virtual devices. It's utilizing a machine learning studio workspace to analyze all that data that it's pulling off these different storage accounts, and then a stream analytics job to help pump in that telemetry information. And these are all PAAS services, and nothing is really running infrastructure as a service, so there's no VMs involved. And I could build the same thing utilizing virtual machines, but it just costs a lot more. And also because operating system updates, patching, I'd have to deal with that. So just the idea of this is to show you guys that you can utilize that in your applications. So try and convert to PAAS services. Just go back to my information. Any questions? So to just wrap it up, there's a number of reference architectures listed on the docs.microsoft.com to help you guys kind of find your way to move away from VM infrastructure. Because we need to start moving towards PAAS, because we need to get to serverless and even better. Because the future is changing. And so start small, look at the simple things that you can go and refactor and port to a PAAS service. A lot of reference architectures out there, including the one that I wanted to show you guys, the e-commerce site. You guys can go and try that out. But the idea is to consider transforming all your existing applications by utilizing logical blocks. So look at your whole stack, look at a workload. Don't just think about, I need to move these 5 services. Look at what workloads are running now. You can change and rewrite that. Think about technical and licensing. I'm also one of the guys who are keen to just utilize an external vendor as well. So if you have some sort of PAAS service running in AWS or a different vendor, be my guest. But try to move toward, or at least off infrastructure as a service. Look at your infrastructure requirements, and define them well. Check application compatibility, utilize CloudHouse and those kind of things, and really think about the processes involved in your applications, like the development, look at the updating and upgrading, like how you're going to manage the stack in the future. Think about technical support and SLAs, because remember, if you're going to go the infrastructure as a service route, quite often you have to pay a lot more, especially when you're running one instance. And also that whole thing, you need to make sure that you build high availability with your workloads in mind. And quite often that's duplicating or having double instances at least of a specific VM to get a good SLA. So very important, always think about those kind of things. My AD tips: always have a look at what's happening in the market, like what changes you can go do, review your architecture regularly. Don't just move it. You actually have to physically try and consider things can change fast. There's always new services being made available. And audit your governance. That's really your first step in building any infrastructure in any cloud. Set up your governance, look at how you're going to be managing and operating your IT infrastructure through your IT guys. How am I doing for time? Any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I have to worry about high availability?
No. That's the great thing.
Yeah.
Because you're not dealing with infrastructure as a service. You do have to consider how much high availability you require, but it's built in, and inherently built in. For example, in a Azure Sequel environment, you have the ability to replicate your database to another region. But Azure Sequel, quite often it's made with a always-on cluster underlying layer. So your workload or your service is always being provided with a good uptime by Microsoft, and that's what you're paying for. Otherwise, you're going to have to build it in if you're going the infrastructure as a service route. And that's why for me it's so simple and easy to use. And you really just click and it's done. Most of the time it's really for my client to get their migration guys to transform the data, get it into Azure, or to develop the application programming to make it work on the platform. Any other questions with you guys? So thank you for joining. I hope it was